display at the Bruntingthorpe Aerodrome in Leicestershire, England in 1959. Bork began shifting its Comets from transatlantic routes, N21, and released the Comet to associate companies, making the Comet 4's ascendancy as a premier airliner brief. Besides the 707 and DC-8, the introduction of the Vickers VC-10 allowed competing aircraft to assume the high-speed, long-range passenger service role pioneered by the Comet. 144, in 1960, as part of a government-backed consolidation of the British aerospace industry. De Havilland itself was acquired by Hawker Siddeley, within which it became a wholly owned division. 145, in the 1960s, orders declined, a total of 76 Comet 4s being delivered from 1958 to 1964. In November 1965, Bork retired its Comet 4s from revenue service. Other operators continued commercial passenger flights with the Comet until 1981. Danair played a significant role in the fleet's later history and, at one time, owned all 49 remaining airworthy civil Comets. 146. On the 14th of March 1997, a Comet 4C serial XS235 and named Canopus 147, which had been acquired by the British Ministry of Technology and used for ADO, radar and avionics trials, made the last documented production Comet flight. 1. Legacy. Danair Comet 4C, Chiefdaiw exhibited at the Flugausstellung Messgale in Germany. The Comet is widely regarded as both an adventurous step forward and a supreme tragedy. The aircraft's legacy includes advances in aircraft design and in accident investigations. The inquiries into the accidents that plagued the Comet 1 were perhaps some of the most extensive and revolutionary that have ever taken place, establishing precedents in accident investigation. Many of the deep-sea salvage and aircraft reconstruction techniques employed have remained in us within the aviation industry. 148. In spite of the Comet being subjected to what was then the most rigorous testing of any contemporary airliner, pressurization and the dynamic stresses involved were not thoroughly understood at the time of the aircraft's development, nor was the concept of metal fatigue. Though these lessons could be implemented on the drawing board for future aircraft, corrections could only be retroactively applied to the Comet. 149, according to de Havilland's chief test pilot John Cunningham, who had flown the prototype's first flight. Representatives from American manufacturers such as Boeing and Douglas privately disclosed that if de Havilland had not experienced the Comet's pressurization problems first, it would have happened to them. 150, Cunningham likened the Comet to the later Concorde and added that he had assumed that the aircraft would change aviation, which it subsequently did. 97, aviation author Bill Witham concluded that Comet had pushed the state of the art beyond its limits. 57, I don't think it is too much to say that you all changed from the moment the Comet's wheels left the ground. Tone Fairbrother manager upgraded Comet development. 151, 152, aeronautical engineering firms were quick to respond to the Comet's commercial advantages and technical flaws alike. Other aircraft manufacturers learned from, and profited by, the hard-earned lessons embodied by de Havilland's Comet. 10, 153, the Comet's buried engines were used on some other early jet airliners, such as the Tupolev Tu-104, 154, but later aircraft, such as the Boeing 707 and Douglas DC-8 differed by employing pod engines held on pylons beneath the wings. 155. Boeing stated that pod engines were selected for their passenger airliners because buried engines carried a higher risk of catastrophic wing failure in the event of engine fire. 156. In response to the Comet tragedies, manufacturers also developed ways of pressurization testing, often going so far as to explore rapid depressurization. Subsequent fuselage skins were of a greater thickness than the skin off the Comet. 157 variants. Comet 1. Union Aero Maritime de Transport Comet 1 AM at Le Bourget Airport in 1952. The Comet 1 was the first model produced, a total of 12 aircraft in service and test. Following closely the design features of the two prototypes, the only noticeable change was the adoption of four-wheel bogie main undercarriage units, replacing the single main wheels. 4 Ghost 50 Mk1 engines were fitted, later replaced by more powerful Ghost DGT-3 series engines. The span was 115 foot, 35 m, and overall length 93 feet, 28 m. The maximum takeoff weight was over 105,000 pounds, 48,000 kilograms, and over 40 passengers could be carried. 62. An updated Comet 1 AM was offered with higher allowed weight, greater fuel capacity, 77, and water methanol injection, 10 were produced. In view of the 1954 disasters, all Comet 1S and 1As were brought back to Hatfield, placed in a protective cocoon and retained for testing. 158. All were substantially damaged in stress testing or were scrapped entirely. 159. Comet 1X. 2 of Comet 1As were rebuilt with heavier gauge skins to a Comet 2 standard for the fuselage, and renamed Comet 1X. 111. Comet 1XB. 4 Comet 1As were upgraded to a 1XB standard with a reinforced fuselage structure and oval windows. Both 1X series were limited in number of pressurization cycles. 159. The DH-111 Comet bomber, a nuclear bomb-carrying variant developed to Air Ministry specification B-35/46, was submitted to the Air Ministry on the 27th of May, 1948. It had been originally proposed in 1948 as the PR Comet, a high-altitude photo-reconnaissance adaptation of the Comet 1. The Ghost DGT-3 powered airframe featured a narrowed fuselage, a bulbous nose with H-2S Mk9 radar, and a 4-crew-member pressurized cockpit under a large bubble canopy. Fuel tanks carrying 2,400 imperial gallons, 11,000 L, breathed to attain a range of 3,350 miles, 5,390 kilometers. The proposed DH-111 received a negative evaluation from the Royal Aircraft Establishment over serious concerns regarding weapons storage. This, along with the redundant capability offered by the RAF's proposed bomber trio, led de Havilland to abandon the project on the 22nd of October 1948. 160. Comet 2. Comet C2, XK671 Aquila at RAF Waterby Hatch, fitted with revised round windows. The Comet 2 had a slightly larger wing, higher fuel capacity and more powerful Rolls-Royce Avon engines, which all improved the aircraft's range and performance. Winking Sad Smiley 161, its fuselage was 3 feet 1 in, 0.94 m, longer than the Comet 1S. 162. Design changes had been made to make the aircraft more suitable for transatlantic operations. 161. Following the Comet 1 disasters, these models were rebuilt with heavier gauge skin and rounded windows, and Avon engines featuring larger air intakes and outward curving jet tailpipes. N22, 163, a total of 12 of the 44-seat Comet 2S were ordered by Bork for the South Atlantic route. 164, the first production aircraft, G-AMXA, flew on the 27th of August 1953. 165, although these aircraft performed well on test flights on the South Atlantic, their range was still not suitable for the North Atlantic. All but 4 Comet 2s were allocated to the RAF. Deliveries beginning in 1955. Modifications to the interiors allowed the Comet 2s to be used in several roles. For VIP transport, the seating and accommodations were altered and provisions for carrying medical equipment including iron lungs were incorporated. Specialized signals intelligence and electronic surveillance capability was latrided to some airframes. 166. Comet 2X, limited to a single Comet Mk1 powered by 4 Rolls-Royce Avon 502 turbojet engines and used as a development aircraft for the Comet 2. 161. Comet 2E. 2 Comet 2 airliners were fitted with Avon 504s in the inner nacelles and Avon 524s in the outer ones. These aircraft were used by Bork for proving flights during 1957-1958. 161. Comet T2. The first 2 of 10 Comet 2s for the RAF were fitted out as crew trainers. The first aircraft, XK669, flying initially on the 9th of December 1955. 166. Comet C2, 8 Comet 2s originally destined for the civil market were completed for the RAF and assigned to number 216 Squadron. 166. Comet 2R, 3 Comet 2s were modified for use in radar and electronic systems development, initially assigned to number 90 Group, later Signals Command, for the RAF. 166, in service with number 192 and number 51 squadrons. The 2R series was equipped to monitor Warsaw Pact signal traffic and operated in this role from 1958. 167, N23. Comet 3. Comet 3 Gian in Bork markings at Farnborough Air Show in September 1954. The Comet 3, which flew for the first time on the 19th of July 1954, was a Comet 2 lengthened by 15 feet 5 in, 4.70 m, and powered by Avon M502 engines developing 10,000 lbf, 44 kN. 168. The variant added wing pinion tanks, and offered greater capacity and range. 169. The Comet 3 was destined to remain a development series since it did not incorporate the fuselage strengthening modifications of the later series aircraft, and was not able to be fully pressurized. 170. Only 2 Comet 3s began construction. Gianlo, the only airworthy Comet 3, was demonstrated at the Farnborough's Back Show in September 1954. The other Comet 3 airframe was not completed to production standard and was used primarily for ground-based structural and technology testing during development of the similarly sized Comet 4. Another 9 Comet 3 airframes were not completed and their construction was abandoned at Hatfield. 171, in Bork colors. Gianlo was flown by John Cunningham in a marathon round-the-world promotional tour in December 1955. 169, as a flying test. It was later modified with Avon RA-29 engines fitted, as well as replacing the original long span wings with reduced span wings as the Comet 3 band demonstrated in British European Airways B livery at the Farnborough Air Show in September 1958. 170. Assigned in 1961 to the Blind Landing Experimental Unit, Blue, at Ray Bedford, the final test role played by Gianlo was in automatic landing system experiments. When retired in 1973, the airframe was used for foam arrestor trials before the fuselage was salvaged at BAE Woodford, to serve as mock-up for the Nimrod. 172, Comet 4. British European Airways Comet 4 at Berlin Tempelhof Airport in October 1968. The Comet 4 was a further improvement on the stretched Comet 3 with even greater fuel capacity. The design had progressed significantly from the original Comet 1, growing by 18 feet 6 in, 5.64 m, and typically seating 74 to 81 passengers compared to the Comet 1's 36 to 44. 119 passengers could be accommodated in our special charter seating package in the later 4C series. 15. The Comet 4 was considered the definitive series, having a longer range, higher cruising speed and higher maximum takeoff weight. These improvements were possible largely because of Avon engines, with twice the thrust of the Comet 1's Ghosts. 140. Deliveries to Bork began on the 30th of September, 1958 with two 48-seat aircraft, which were used to initiate the first scheduled transatlantic services. Comet 4B, originally developed for Capital Airlines as the 4AM. The 4B featured greater capacity through a 2M longer fuselage, and a shorter wingspan. 18 were produced. Comet 4C. This variant featured the Comet 4's wings and the 4B's longer fuselage. 28 were reproduced. The last two Comet 4C fuselages were used to build prototypes of the Hawker Siddeley Nimrod maritime patrol aircraft. 173, a Comet 4C, SAR-7, was ordered by Saudi Arabian Airlines with an eventual disposition to the Saudi Royal Flight for the exclusive use of King Saud bin Abdul Aziz. Extensively modified at the factory, the aircraft included a VIP front cabin, a bed, special toilets with gold fittings, and was distinguished by a green, gold and white color scheme with polished wings and lower fuselage that was commissioned from aviation artist John Stroud. Following its first flight, the special order Comet 4 was described as the world's first executive jet. 174, Comet 5 proposal. The Comet 5 was proposed as an improvement over previous models, including a wider fuselage width for the breast seating, a wing with greater sweep and podded Rolls-Royce Conway engines. Without support from the Ministry of Transport, the proposal languished as a hypothetical aircraft and was never realized. 175, N24, Hawker Siddeley Nimrod. The last two Comet 4C aircraft produced were modified as prototypes, 15148 and 15147, to meet a British requirement for a maritime patrol aircraft for the Royal Air Force, initially named Maritime Comet. Their design was designated Type HS801. 173. This variant became the Hawker Siddeley Nimrod, and production aircraft were built at the Hawker Siddeley factory at Woodford Aerodrome. Entering service in 1969, 5 Nimrod variants were produced. 176. The final Nimrod aircraft were retired in June 2011. 177, operators. Dan Air Comet 4S and back 111s at London Gatwick Airport in 1976. The original operators of the early Comet 1 and the Comet 1AM were BOAC, Union Aero-Maritime de Transport and Air France. Early Comets were withdrawn from service for accident inquiries, during which orders from British Commonwealth, Pacific Airlines, Japan Airlines, Linea Aeropostal Venezolana, National Airlines, Pan American, World Airways and Pan Air do Brazil were cancelled. 81, 82. When the redesigned Comet 4 entered service, it was flown by customers Bork, Aerolíneas Argentinas, and East African Airways. 178, while the Comet 4B variant was operated by customers B and Olympic Airways. 178, and the Comet 4 model was flown by customers Kuwait Airways, Mexicana Middle East Airlines, Misra Airlines and Sudan Airways. 82. Other operators used the Comet either through leasing arrangements or through second-hand acquisitions. Bork's Comet 4S were leased out to Air Ceylon, Air India, Air Ecuador, Central African Airways. 179, and Qantas Empire Airways Winkinsat Smiley. 81. 180. After 1965 they were sold to Area Ecuador, Dan Air, Mexicana Malaysian Airways, and the Ministry of Defense. 82, 178, 181.